if there were a series of landmines that you could tread on your way to commercial success, I literally hopscotched onto every one of those bloody things. Boom, boom, boom. I got to look back and go, well, oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. Maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Hi, I'm Alex Congdon, and this is the Expat Business Hero podcast. So welcome. Today's guest is Keven Gambold, who's a good friend of mine for several years. Now, Keven describes himself as a pretty average RAF bomber pilot, stumbling entrepreneur, and an excellent socialite. So welcome, Keven.
Several years. Are you kidding me? We went to university together back in the 90s.
We did.
So that was a different century, for crying out loud. Yeah, it's a delight to be on, Alex. I think it's a stupendously good idea. So, over the moon to help.
That introduction was, I think, intriguing a lot of people. And I think the question on a lot of people's lips is, what makes you think you're an excellent socialite?
Well, it's been one of my since our days, since we were old enough to go out and legally imbibe. I think it's been one of my fortes. So, and you should play to your strengths. I think that is one of my key takeaways from life to date. And I spend a lot of time practicing. So yes, that's practice makes perfect. I mean, I'm almost brilliant at it.
So, as probably a lot of people can hear, I can detect a bit of an accent there. You are actually British, but you actually live in the US right now. How did you end up in the US?
Yes. I've changed over to the dark side. In fact, 2 months ago, I became a US citizen, having lived here for about 10 years, all told, on and off. My background was British Royal Air Force. I have to explain British Royal Air Force because nobody knows about the Royals over here. Anyway, but Royal Air Force pilot from after university when we were housemates, actually, if you think back that far, and spent 21 years traipsing around the world, Germany, Scotland, and quite a bit of time in the US. One of my last tours had been out flying for the American Air Force on their unmanned aircraft program, the Predator. Ironically, just to show my age, the aircraft type that I was flying has stopped flying now. They shut it down last month. So I was here for 4 years from about 2004, and literally the first day I walked into work, I bumped into a young lady in a flying suit, and she was extraordinarily rude to me. And so I decided that I'd get my own back by subsequently marrying her, making the last 13 years miserable as she delivered 3 gorgeous children. And she was in the American Air Force as an intelligence officer at the time. We managed to sort of follow each other around before I retired. But in about 2010, we were having our first child, and I was sufficiently old and not sufficiently senior enough to trump her. So she was younger, smarter, and more senior than I was in her Air Force. So I retired from the US, from the Royal Air Force, and have subsequently followed her around as a house husband and pseudo entrepreneur ever since. So that's the beginning of the story. She came back we were actually on a joint tour in Germany. I was at a NATO headquarters when I retired, but we've been back in the States since then, so for about 7 years this time.
So going back a bit, Keven, I remember one of my profound memories was during one of the Gulf Wars when you were in service flying your Tornado bomber. And I remember a news flash coming over on BBC saying that a British Tornado had just been shot down. And they didn't say that it was a pretty average RAF bomber. They just said it was a Tornado bomber. And my first thoughts were the worst that had happened to you. Were you aware of the impact that your day job was having on your friends and family around you at the time?
No. So sorry about that. To keep you, I mean, my dad had been in the RAF for many years, and he'd been flying fighters, the Lightning, the British Electric Lightning, in defence of the UK for since the 60s. So he was. We as a family were familiar with, service and its pluses and minuses. But to be honest, how it impacts the family was more about the separation. So, a lot of time, my dad being away for about a year as he went down to the Falkland Islands, for example. So that was that's the biggest, I think, day-to-day impact. I don't think anybody really considers the shooting war element because, when you're out there, it's a job you train for. When you are home, or when those of the family are at home, there's an enormous separation. All you really get are some fairly light-hearted letters.
Yeah.
There used to be blueies. In fact, when I started, yes. Blueies. Now, of course, emails and or e-blueies. And the news, that's all you get. And of course, the news is always a hyperbole. So, unfortunately, from my dad's perspective, back in the 60s, 70s, there was a tremendous number of people were dying just because the aircraft were old or new or, but older technology. These days, I mean, even in the shooting wars, the amount of people we've lost is staggeringly low, and thank God.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry about the sleepless nights you had.
Well, thanks.
But I was getting mortared in Kuwait, so
Well, I won't
not that sorry.
Well, okay. Forward wind a bit then. So you give up your pretty average RAF bomber pilot career, which, to be honest, had quite some status associated with it. Now, and then you decide to set up, a drone consulting business. So, I mean, why?
Well. Okay, so interesting. A phenomenon which I don't think my parents got their head around. I'm not entirely sure they're there yet. Is becoming a stay-at-home dad. And this was the debate you and I had in 2010, I think, where with the assistance of Jack Daniels, we went, and an inordinate amount of YouTube videos, we looking for a job for me. If I was going to retire and become the stay-at-home dad, heavily pregnant wife, what was I going to do? And the discussions ranged from literally just being daddy daycare to being maybe a flight instructor on the civil world, maybe an airline pilot. All of these were options. But your entrepreneurial verve was the thing that, piqued my interest. And it was that weekend that we came up with the scope, the title. I remember you rushing upstairs and finding me we were discussing what the website should be and therefore what the name of the company had to be. And that was all down to you back then, as I said. So that was what kicked it off. And I think after that weekend, I was going off to a conference in my day job, sort of 2 weeks later, and I had to rush out to print some business cards based on what we'd discussed that weekend and the website domain that you'd cornered for us. So the concept was behind what was the one thing I had that wasn't out in the market. What was the niche? And the niche at the time was unmanned aircraft, drones, and having significant experience outside of the military. So I was one of the first guys to retire, having had 4 years of flying operational unmanned aircraft, remotely piloted aircraft, drones, and there was a market out there for that knowledge. So that was the concept that we decided on, and it has, for better or worse, been a successful one.
I mean, did you miss the status of having a pretty important role in the Air Force? Because having a regular role in an institution of that size, that importance, comes a lot comes with that, and then you shift over to to creating something yourself. You're starting at the bottom. Did you miss anything from that previous life?
Well, I mean, there's two ways to look at it, of course. I went from being staff officer 2 in a fairly low-level NATO headquarters in Germany to being chief executive officer of unmanned experts. So that was a meteoric rise to the bottom to some extent. Yeah, we had this saying in the Air Force, which was you would float, you would sink to the top. Where if you stayed in the Air Force long enough, all the good people would leave and you would just be at the top without having to do any effort whatsoever. So it was, I think that's the point of this podcast really, is that the trials and tribulations of making that move. I will, if I could do it separately, do it again, I wouldn't change it. Because, and the key to comedy was, I spent 21 years, my young, impressionable years between 20 and 40, having the most amazing job. I mean, that's a kid's dream of flying, 28 tons of metal and metal high explosives and petrol at extremely high speeds at extremely low level, for, if you'll pardon the expression, shits and giggles. And in defense of the Queen, obviously. So thank you, Betty. So I had lived that life. So to then take a backseat to my wife's job, to focus on my kids. My first kid was born when I was 40. So I'm now 47. I have 3. I have a 2-year-old, and I say the 2-year-old can get up before I can after I've changed her diaper. So I'm not saying that this is the answer for everybody, because everything hurts and I don't get any sleep. But I don't think I would change it, because I got that life and I got to focus on me and be me. But I couldn't imagine trying to be a 25-year-old frontline Typhoon pilot with a kid at home. You just couldn't give the family the focus, I think, that it deserves. So, yeah, it wasn't a problem for me, but that's because I'd seen this moving into another phase where the focus was different.
So you said on the introduction that you were a stumbling entrepreneur. So, what was tripping you up?
Incompetence, basically. Yes, a lack of knowledge, understanding, etc. And so I I recall that very conference that I rushed off to with these business cards, and I was chairing the conference in my capacity in the NATO job, but I also had business cards, and I was already on the roll out. So that I had a little bit of kudos with respect to that team because of my position with the NATO role, and also my background. But in addition, on side discussions, I could talk to these people as a potential consultant, and one of them went for it. A fairly major prime, as they say, in one of the countries. So we shook hands, and he said, "Look, that's great. I'm going to send you an NDA, and we'll get things spun up." And I was like, "Great, do just that. You got my email." And then I had to go and look up what NDA stood for, because I had no flipping idea what I had just agreed to. Non-disclosure agreement if you're not tracking. And so it was like, what? And that set the scene. I mean, I am not kidding. It couldn't have been more of a series of stumbling errors, a good and bad fortune over the last 7 years, to describe. And so I think there's a couple of good books that I picked up along the way, and and some great advice from yourself and the like. I never had a mentor, which a lot of people talk to, and I do look back and think, wow, maybe that would have helped a little bit. But we were a cottage industry of me. In fact, employee number one, who was a colleague of mine from New York, came on full time, probably year three. So up until then, I was just a consultant paying some bills. That was it. If there were a series of landmines that you could tread on your way to commercial success, I literally hopscotched onto every one of those bloody things. Boom, boom, boom. I got to look back and go, well, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Maybe I shouldn't have.
Now, were there any landmines associated with being in the US? Being a Brit in the US, was it? I mean, it's a pretty business friendly environment, I guess. But anything there that got you?
Well, the first things first. I mean, you literally are. My legal team consisted of an account with LegalZoom. So I go onto LegalZoom and I'm like, okay, no, I need the US version and I want to start a business. And it says, do you want to be an S Corp, a C Corp, or an LLC? And I'm like, eh. And eeny, meeny, miny. I had no idea. So eventually, I did a bit of research. I settled on a limited liability company, an LLC, which basically meant that you as an individual, it's for small firms mostly, but it's pass through tax. It's all about where the tax is. So, but it also meant you had some corporate cover, so they couldn't sue you. Anyway. So I set up this LLC in Alabama, not for tax reasons, but that's because that's where we were going to be. And of course, I never realized that Alabama has a state tax. And if I'd set it up in Maryland, which doesn't, you could save yourself a whole lot of money. I just never thought of these things. Anyway, set up in Alabama. We were there for 1 year. Then we moved to North Carolina. And I moved to North Carolina. I just said, hey, by the way, I'm just moving the address of the LLC. And they went, oh, no. Your company, Unmanned Experts LLC, is an Alabama company. If you want to move to North Carolina, you have to dissolve that company and start a new one. Oh, and I'm like, what? Or you can register it as a foreign entity, as in foreign to North Carolina, not foreign as in British. And I'm like, what? That just so I did as a foreign entity, which is effectively a separate company in North Carolina. And then we moved to Virginia. And then we moved to Nevada. And so I had 4 separate companies, and when we finally incorporated in Colorado, don't even ask why, but when we got some investors, we incorporated into a C Corp, which is totally separate concept. And I had to dissolve them all through 4 separate secretaries of state, through just this is why you should have got shares in LegalZoom, because they made a bomb out of me. So it was just dumb ass things like this. And then of course, the tax system. I mean, good Lord, the tax process is brutal. I mean, just brutal. I still file separately from my wife because I just don't want her involved with the shenanigans that I have to go through every bloody year. So. And it's like rolling a dice. I'd say, okay, that's all my tax information. Pretty sure we didn't make a profit last year. How much do I owe you? Oh, well, you owe us $16,000. And I'm like, what? No. Roll the dice again. And they did it again. And said, no, actually, it was only 8,000. I'm like, what? Nothing changed in those 2 emails. And yet somehow I owe you up. It's just insane.
So if you had to go back again, do you think you would have, you would set out from the beginning to get more help, get more advice, get more mentoring? Is that something that you think that was lacking at the first time around?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. I mean, it was 2010. So that sounds like it should have been more modern, but things like LinkedIn and even Facebook or anything like this, they weren't as prevalent. In fact, I think we started a social media campaign in about 14 maybe, so we're a bit behind the time. But I think there are plenty of groups out there that now could get you where you wanted to be, to give you the knowledge, like self-help social media teams. There are, all sorts of entrepreneur. I think the concept of entrepreneurialism is now very well established. Probably, because of the unicorns type companies out of Silicon Valley. I mean, it's every day you hear about these things popping for 8 billion, and you're like, what? So I think that is now a more established route. And I think, or I hope, there are accelerators. I mean, I never even heard of an accelerator, but this is for entrepreneurial management teams to learn the ropes, to have direct contact with the Richard Bransons of the world, and to train themselves up and not make all the buffoonerish errors that I did. At least do it with someone else's money.
So talking of buffoonery, I mean, doing something like this is not without its risks. So, I mean, for you personally, what was at stake here? Or for you, for your family, for whatever? What did you risk losing if this didn't work out?
Okay, so it's interesting. When it kicked off, I mean, it was a relatively low risk proposal. When we went from a fairly significant 2-income family to a 1-income family and added a child. So that was going to be an issue. So what I wanted to do was just add a minimum level of personal income that I needed to clear. And by fair means and foul, we pretty much got there. As with anything, and these are, just the lessons you take away, your outs always increase. There's always something sat in your inbox in the morning which says, hey, why didn't you upgrade your Dropbox account to premium where you can get another X gigabytes? And you're like, X gigabytes, and that's a little pretty. I'll take a bit of that. Oh, and that. Oh, Intuit. Yeah, we should get the latest QuickBooks and blah blah blah. And suddenly, your overheads are 2,000-3,000 a month. As a one-man show, and you're like, what the heck am I doing? And then suddenly, now your requirement, now you actually have to get more work in, and you start dropping the ball. I mean, so. The risk was that we would undergo some financial hardship originally. But, I could always work in McDonald's or whatever. I'm actually a qualified Lyft driver. Did you know that? Yeah. Just in case. Just in case. Never done it yet. But I have it as an option should it hit the wall. And this is because, we are. So, but the company grew. We brought on people, and then we brought on investors. And that is an entirely separate chapter. And one that I was woefully inadequately prepared for. We brought on a guy who knew what he was talking about, who knew some people, and that was an education in itself. But good Lord, we got our first $1 million check. I took a photo of it, and I was over the moon. Yay, investors, woohoo, check us out. We're in the big league. And then I stopped and went, wait, we have to pay this money back. If we pay on our current, P&L and blah, 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 it'll be like 40 years. And this chap sits me down and he goes, no, they just bought 20% of the company. And I'm like, oh, okay, so it's my money. Yay, let's go. let's go. Whatever. Anyway, so it was, that's when the risk increases. Now, suddenly, it's not just to me and my family. Now, the overheads are increased. So my compensation had increased. My reliance on that compensation had increased. Our family had increased. All of these things were happening. And now I had other people. We probably, at the top end, we had about 11 people. We were much smaller now. We've been through a phase. And you start worrying about these people. I mean, I still do. I really do. We had to lay off a couple because they were charlatans. We had to lay off a couple because we couldn't afford them. But, we let them down gently. We still got some some guys and girls hanging around that, you know, I really worry about how we can keep them fed and watered. So.
I mean, would you, in terms of success, then, what would you say would have been, you know, a key success for you in this journey of setting up a business?
An exit event, I think, was, you know, obviously when you get into the investment piece and you're like, okay, so where's the door? That's what I'm interested in. You know, it's a 3 to 5 year window. Let's go. And we ran down a couple of blind alleys, actually, which was interesting. And I tell you what, there's a book out there. I mean, unmanned aircraft is relatively tech heavy. It's called Crossing the Chasm. It's a real easy book to read. In fact, you can read the first couple of chapters and get the gist. But I had read it a million years ago, and I reread it about a year and a half ago when we were going through some troubles, and I just couldn't believe it. It felt like someone had been watching my every move and writing about it, because we were trying to get to a mainstream market with the tech product, and that's all it's about. And it's all about how you can get some initial marketing and think you're doing really well, but that is just the forward-thinking innovators. The mainstream non-innovators, that's your end market. But to get there is this chasm, and without even realizing it, you know, we were hitting these little numbers here going, yay, we're winning, and we weren't even close. And that is an entirely separate marketing strategy. You know, it's just stuff we hadn't really thought through. And so that was a tremendous education. And, you know, and I saw this advert said that CEOs read an average of 60 books a year. Now, as a CEO, for 10 years, I haven't read 60 books in 10 bloody years. So, and that includes Harry Potter. So I suspect that's a bollocks number. But there are clearly a couple of books out there that that could or would have, you know, been tremendously beneficial. So you could probably corner those books and have a little stack of 5, maybe even 3. So you want to start your business, read these 3 books.
Well,
and
at least,
even better,
do you remember
read them all.
The author of the Crossing the Chasm, or we can look it up and share it afterwards? It's okay. But,
yeah. I mean, that's what I love about Google these days is, you know, you don't even need an ISBN. You just go Cross the Chasm, Google it, you know. So yeah, well, I've got it upstairs somewhere. But
so this is a funny one. Looking ahead, what are your, you know, what do you want to achieve? What are your goals next 5 years, next 10 years?
Well, interesting. So the company started as this one-man band. It grew to be, you know, a thing. You know, we had a name in the industry, and then last year we ran down a blind alley in one particular market. We just laser focused on this market because we'd finally decided that was the one it was going to open up in. Railway bridge inspections, funnily enough, by drones. And we were fundamentally wrong and probably not in the concept of it, but in the timeline. And so, you know, we've been talking about how drones are going to change the world for the last 15 years. Well, they just bloody haven't. You know, they have eked their presence into our daily lives, but they haven't exploded. And I don't think anybody has really crossed the chasm just yet. Anybody's in the mainstream market. There are a couple of areas maybe. So we blew all our capital. We blew all of our our efforts and our marketing efforts. And so we're now total pivot back to where we originally were, which is predominantly a consultancy firm. And I am, as of right now, trying to establish where I want it to be in 5 years, notwithstanding the fact that the poor investors have to, sit by while I make my mind up. The concept of how we would grow this again back to where it was, but in which market is an interesting one. Fortunately, there are areas of this tech enterprise that are, I think, coming more to the fore. Swarming drones, and I think there is still, with a bit of dedicated research, picking up the right people, we could quickly orient the new company to meet those tech consultancy challenges. So I think that's where we're going to be. But we certainly we were aimed at being all things to all people. You know, we were supposed to have 20 teams out inspecting, you know, dams and bridges and highways and etc. And it just, nobody's really got there yet. And we ran out of our first bunch of money trying to do it. So we're lucky we're not bankrupt, to be brutally honest. It got very close for a while. So yeah, we're kind of licking our wounds and deciding what we want to do next. You know, I mean,
you decided to write a book, and
yes.
it's on Amazon. Can you tell me a bit about that book and why you decided to write it and what the book's about?
Well, there've been a significant amount of drunken shenanigans in my life during my time in the military. I always wanted to write about those because they're extremely non-PC, and the Air Force currently now, it would be scandalous if that sort of stuff went on again. You know, nothing illegal or immoral, and you know, nothing that'll end me up in court. And trust me, I mean, when you get the Me Too movement shove up and you go, oh, do I need to be worried? Fortunately, no. So, you know, you gotta. I was reading Sir Cliff Richard has his court cases going, you know, from something back in the 90s, and you've really got to think back in the new moral environment. But so the concept of running a book was always with me. But of course, last year when we were in a lot of trouble and we were skirting with bankruptcy, etc., there wasn't a lot of work on. I mean, we didn't have any funding to do business development. We hit the brick wall of that route we were going. So I had a bit of time on my hands, and I was, you know, looking for some supplemental income. By the way, yeah, don't write a book if you want supplemental income. I'll just throw that out. Unless you're Hillary Clinton and you've got a marketing department. With one thing about writing about, the great phrase was, you should write drunk, edit sober, marketing is the hangover. And I got to tell you, that's another lesson learned from last year. I suck at marketing. I just don't like, you know, bigging myself up. Anyway, so I wrote this book. It's in the vein of a business comedic tragedy, and it's called "How to Blow $1 Million." An entrepreneur's guide to what not to do, an ex-entrepreneur's guide, actually. And because it's short read, but it's supposed to elucidate many of the lessons that you're discussing here. The things I didn't know, the things I should have known, the things I did know but forgot or ignored and wish I hadn't. So, because the concept is that there are a million books out there about how to succeed, all from Richard Branson and, you know, from Trump and etc., all those types. But there aren't many books out there about how not to fail. You know, I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, for example, and his recent address at South by Southwest, he was saying both his companies, SpaceX and Tesla, nearly went under about 10 years ago. At the same time, he'd totally run out of operating capital. He was about to be fired as the boss of both of them. But I mean, it's amazing to hear these when you think about them now. But there aren't enough people out there telling those stories. Don't bloody do this, all right? And maybe a mentor could get you there. But to be honest, I think somebody who has failed in a business is I mean, I always said this in the Air Force, that the best flying instructors were the ones who hadn't been very good pilots, because they understand what you're doing wrong. The guys who had landed perfectly every time don't understand why you can't land perfectly. I can do it. Why can't you? Just watch this. Bang. There you go. Done it. Easy. You go, but what does this hand do again? You know, so it's so I think having a business failure under your belt is actually would make me a much better mentor for somebody than somebody that's been extraordinarily successful. That's my theory. I haven't put it to the test yet. But there's the book, and it's designed to, in 180 pages, put together the what not to do.
Brilliant.
That's the plan.
Listen, Keven, it's been brilliant, and I just ask one more question. Will you promise to come back, because I think we need to carry on the story another time, pick up from where we left off. But thanks so much for sharing your stories, and really appreciate it.
Great. Well, that probably means you need to come back over here. We'll be in DC next year, and I'll bring Jack. How's that?
Look forward to it. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks. Pleasure. All the best. Bye.